think that's beautiful.
All right. Take us live here. live on the air.
Whoa. Sounds impressive.
Got my sunglasses on here, so I look like a live rock star. Just very bright here at NPR. I got folks with you in 1 minute.
Oh, I shaved this morning. Are you ever going to grow back your beard? Not for the tattoo. I like this disguise. I got a story for you the other way around. I was
Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Drew Hudson. I'm the director here at Environmental Action. We are just about to get started with our frack-free radio hour here at NPR, updating you on what's been going on with the NPR campaign. It's very bright and sunny here in Washington, D.C., as you can tell, but the weather's nice, so we're doing our broadcast live from the sort of courtyard here outside of NPR. I'll just show you around. Up here we have the famous NPR Tower, which you can see all the way from down at the Capitol, which is a few blocks south of us. And we're sitting here with a couple of our friends from Beyond Extreme Energy who are going to join us over the next couple of minutes and update us on what's been going on with some local NPR work, or some work local on NPR out in the States, and some works talking to the Ombud and the corporate office that is behind me here in Washington, D.C. So we'll have a couple of different updates for you live from the courtyard here, and we'll also be asking for your help throughout this little podcast to support the work that we're doing to challenge NPR to stop taking money from the Natural Gas Alliance and stop airing what we think are biased news reports about fracking and climate change. So if you are moved already, before we've even asked, there's a little link right above this YouTube window up here somewhere that you can click on to make a donation to support the work, which Steve and Don will tell you more about in a minute. And if you stay tuned with us for just another couple minutes, we'll get started with the interviews and give you some updates from around the country about what's been happening on the campaign to stop fracking NPR coverage. So stay tuned with us. We'll be right back with you. Again, I'm Drew Hudson from Environmental Action.
Yeah, sounds very professional. Very polished.
Wasn't lying. I always wanted to be Ira Glass. Just didn't have the voice for it.
Just so you don't become what's his name, Seal. Yeah. After that one story, I'm just like, I don't have good thoughts about it. Which story? The story, the Northeast Pennsylvania story? No, the story that he did with Jurgen about how natural gas is going on forever. The sky's the limit, and this is the fuel of the future. Absolutely no neutrality, no balance, and total propaganda for the industry. There's also the fact they haven't reported that I know of that Johns Hopkins. Yeah, study. Yeah. Well, I mean, women's health. And one of the things that I'm going to need help on is to identify the stories that they missed, right? Because I won't know about them necessarily. You can't expect every North organization to give us the story. Well, but but still, if there's a pattern of missing, yeah, right. There's a pattern or whatever. I mean, and that seemed like a pretty big deal, and also it's kind of local. Johns Hopkins, Baltimore, right? Yep. I'm going up the street miles away. So.
I also have some flyers here in this bag. Our friends arrived. I have 2 flavors. These are the uncut ones, which someone can carefully tear in half. These are the ones that are already cut in half. Hang one of those and just hand them out.
Blown away. You got scissors, or should I just do it?
I didn't bring scissors with me, so just tear. Steve, you want to come over and we'll get started? I think,
so you want me to sit next to you?
Yeah, come on over to this side of the bench. Have a seat here. Okay. There you go. Oh, so look at that. There we are. Cool. So
should I look at this? Or you look at you?
You can look at me or look at them. They're looking back at you, but you can't tell. So,
right.
So
It's a little bit or you look directly at them.
So everyone, this is Steve Norris, one of our activist friends from Beyond Extreme Energy, which has been here with us at NPR before, and also is the group that we've been working with down at FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to do a series of protests. You may have seen the big one last spring was FERCus, and before that there was a big protest last year, right before, around the time of the election in early November. Those were both Beyond Extreme Energy organized protests. And they've also been working with Environmental Action on this campaign about trying to remove fracking sponsorship from NPR. And Steve in particular has been doing a really cool thing, which is talking to his local station in North Carolina where he's from. So Steve, first of all, will you just kind of update people on what was your idea to talk to the station manager in Asheville, and how did it go when you called him up?
So I figured it would be good to get some information from a local NPR affiliate about how they think about their relationship with National Public Radio, the national organization here in Washington, and about the ANGA ads themselves, the ads by the American Natural Gas Alliance, one of the major lobbying groups for the frack gas industry in this country, which has been pushing this campaign on NPR, the Think About It campaign. And those of you who listen to NPR, everyone has heard one or another of these Think About It ads, and there are a bunch of them. And so I thought it would be very useful to talk to the general manager, if I could get a hold of him, of the local station in Asheville where I live, and which I have donated to in the past. And I also have, a couple of years ago, I started sending, as I became aware of the ANGA ads, I started sending them notes every time they sent me a request for a donation, because I'm on the mailing list since I have donated in the past. And I would send them notes, or I'd actually call them up and say, look, I will be very happy to send you a check for $100 as soon as you drop these ANGA ads. And nobody gave me the time of day.
Right.
And I got tired of just doing that. So I said, well, I should try to get in touch with the general manager. So I actually emailed him. His name's David Feingold. And David, if you're listening, I've never met you, but how are you doing today?
I'm from North Carolina.
I'm from Asheville. You know who I am. He's responded to my my emails and whatever. So in August, I sent him this thing because they had sent me a letter for their fall fundraiser saying, please donate. And I sent him an email and said, David, your station has never even had the courtesy of responding to my comment. And so I'd love to talk to you about this. And lo and behold, he emailed me right back and said, yeah, we should have a conversation. So we did. We talked one day for half an hour, 40 minutes and so on, and sort of explored the issues from my perspective and his perspective. Now, he's new at this. He just moved from Nebraska to Asheville. So he's a new general manager. I don't know that he worked for NPR or for an affiliate in Nebraska. I don't know what his background is. So he's kind of just learning the ropes. And he was aware of the ANGA ads, but he did not know much of the details about them. He let me, CQS is Asheville's a small city. It's a city of 75,000. So compared to like WAMU here in Washington or the other big NPR stations in the big cities, it's really a small operation. But he's trying to figure out his role and maybe what kind of influence he might have over NPR National. And so I told him, one, my concern as a climate change activist and somebody who has repeatedly been trying to influence the institutions in this country who have significant influence over the frack gas process and this tsunami of new natural gas infrastructure that is being installed in this country. Of course, like you said, our major work with Beyond Extreme Energy has been at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is a very powerful regulatory agency that many people in the country have never heard about. So David Feingold and I explored this issue of ANGA ads and the question of whether how the ANGA ads influence people, and then how the ANGA ads have potentially influenced NPR's reporting of frack gas issues, which is one of the biggest issues in the country right now. and being a good liberal. And somebody I once met described a good liberal as somebody who has both feet firmly planted in midair. David Feingold seemed to have both feet firmly planted in midair, meaning one, he is very concerned about issues like this and issues that affect his children and grandchildren and his family and so on. He was having been from Nebraska, he was very aware of the Keystone XL pipeline and the protests that have gone on in Nebraska around that and so on. At the same time, so he knows about the issue. He thinks it's really important. At the same time, he is protective of his station, WCQS, and defensive about NPR. NPR clearly needs money to do its operations, and he has no idea how much money ANGA is spending in underwriting NPR ads, but we sort of assume it's a lot of money. And he couldn't confirm that, but he didn't deny that that was likely. He did say that WCQS, as a small station, or any affiliate for that matter, does not have much influence. It feels like they don't have much influence over national NPR policy and underwriting. On the other hand, he did, at the end of this conversation, say, he sort of indicated he was really glad to be in touch with me, and and I said, well, can I keep feeding you more information as it comes along? And I'll try to be discriminating as to what I inform you about and what I don't, because I get a lot of articles about frack gas and so on. I'd like to only send him stuff that might impact him in some way. So that's what I've done. And so the conversation that I had with him at that time, this was in August, was an opening conversation because my perspective on these is it takes a while for people to learn what's going on, and he clearly didn't know a lot of what's going on, either with ANGA ads, with NPR National, and with frack gas. So I saw this as an opportunity to open that door without at the same time trying to slam him. I did, and I can't remember exactly how, but I did say that there was some discussion going on in Beyond Extreme Energy and other places in environmental action to perhaps encourage people to withhold donations to local affiliates, because
like you had done, or said you were doing.
Like I had done, I've been doing it, to withhold those donations, with the idea that maybe if that was done on a large enough scale, and what the large enough scale is, none of us has any idea. My guess is a small scale that was implemented in different places would have an enormous impact on NPR, because they need these local donations. And if this campaign took off in a significant way, it could really undermine NPR, and they don't want that to happen. And they're probably getting enough money from ANGA right now that until this wave grows enough, they're not going to pay attention. But my sense is it may not be that hard to get a wave growing that would get NPR's attention more than we have so far. So in any case, I kind of hinted it to him, or said to him, look, we're discussing this possibility. Of course, he immediately said, that is not a good idea.
Right. Local stations are not a fan of this idea of withholding pledges, because they're the beneficiaries of those pledges.
And the nice thing was, he started giving me some advice about other ways of going after NPR. And one of the things he said, and we haven't had time to work on this, but NPR has maybe 2 boards of directors. We know of one of its boards of directors, and it may be the only one, but there's probably more. It has a board of directors of general managers of local affiliates of NPR. And there are, 12 or 15 of these people who sit on a board, probably meet 3 or 4 times a year here in Washington, to articulate to NPR National their concerns as local affiliates. So he said, go after those guys. Don't go after me. Go after those guys. So I thought that was excellent advice, And even though he was trying to distract us from him, it still seemed like a
2 really important points in that, because I think this is a great sort of sum up moment. So one is that the general station managers are actually really approachable. We've heard from a number of people around the country who have, called in or complained about the ANGA ads or things like that, but not a lot of folks have had this particular idea Steve did of calling up the station and asking for a meeting with the general manager. And it turns out, one, that's actually not very hard to do. The general managers at local stations are pretty accessible, and that most people, especially if you've ever been a donor or just if you're a regular listener, there's a pretty good chance that you can kind of get in the door and have a conversation. And the second was that they were, in some ways, very receptive. I mean, Steve was able to have a good conversation with his GM in Asheville, again, a somewhat smaller station, but, just one activist calling. And then that they were really responsive, especially to this idea that we were, people were withholding pledge dollars. And this is something we've kind of unearthed, and we'll get into the research a little bit more with Don in a minute. But we've come to understand a lot more about how the corporate structure at NPR works over the last few months. And one of the big revelations for us has been that NPR is actually mostly funded. The national office here in DC gets the sort of preponderance of its funding, or the biggest source of its funding is the local stations. The station in Asheville or here in DC or whatever your local station is, that's actually where most of the money for the national programs like Morning Edition or All Things Considered comes from. And so in a lot of ways, NPR is dependent on the local stations for their funding in the same way, or to a greater extent than they're dependent on the Natural Gas Alliance funding. And that's a really big deal because it means that we can work with our local stations to send this message up the chain that this ANGA money is unacceptable, that we think there's problems with the coverage, and that there's a real power there that we have as local listeners by working with our local stations. It's also why we've done some work at Environmental Action to ask people to kind of tally up their NPR donations, but we haven't asked people to withhold their pledges to local stations. And that's because in a lot of ways, the local stations are sort of victims of this too. They're kind of caught in the middle. They don't have the power to tell the NPR corporate office here, hey, stop running those ANGA ads, or hey, do more reporting on climate change. They could pass it along, but it's a recommendation from the local station, just like it'd be a recommendation from a local listener. And so what we're interested in doing is trying to build pressure from the local affiliates up to the national. And it may involve asking people to withhold pledges, or that's kind of a powerful stick that we would have over local stations. But we don't necessarily want people just to, stop, boycott NPR or stop giving to your local pledge drive, because there is this disconnect between their funding and the national funding. So it's a great thing to bring up. If somebody calls you as part of a pledge drive or sends you a letter, by all means, write and call back to your local station and say, hey, I would be a donor, or I am a donor, but I'm really bothered by these Natural Gas Alliance ads, or I have questions about the coverage on the national shows, and use it to start a conversation with the local stations is really effective. And we feel like there's a lot of power there. And over the next couple of weeks, Steve will tell me more about this. We're actually hoping to develop that more, and Beyond Extreme Energy has offered to help kind of put together like a toolkit or a recipe kit so that folks can have easy opportunities to interact with local station leaders. Do you want to say a little more about?
Yeah, so we have an organizing group. We call it an NPR working group of Beyond Extreme Energy, including Environmental Action, which there are 4 of us right now. Melinda, who's in Connecticut, me, who's in North Carolina, you who live in South Carolina, and Don, who's over here, who lives in Philadelphia, have been working on this for the last 3 or 4 months, trying to figure out strategies. So we have developed various prongs from this strategy, including some stuff Don will talk about, including the possibility, we have done some communications with the NPR ombudsperson, who looks to us like she runs defense for NPR at this point, because she has been very defensive about this. But we have this board of directors that I was talking about of local station managers, which we may try to work with. And so we have various kind of possibilities for doing this. And I think it can all play out in various ways. One thing I did this last week, NPR had a very interesting but disturbing report on its national programming this week about a study that was done in Northeast Pennsylvania based upon a very limited sample that apparently showed that fracking fluids that are injected 2 miles into the ground or whatever are not working their way up into groundwater, which is a good thing if they're not. But at the same time, it said that spilling from well digging is working its way into groundwater, but it used this as an opportunity and seemed to kind of generalize to say, well, fracking is not nearly the problem as some people say it is, and kind of left it at that with this report, which seemed like a big distortion of some of the reality based upon a sample, in this case, of 64 wells, whereas there are tens of thousands of wells being drilled all over the country. And we know that some of them are having very significant impacts on local water and there's also a Johns Hopkins study that was released in the last couple of weeks showing that pregnancies are significantly influenced by proximity to fracking wells, and the specific mechanisms of that weren't addressed in that study. But we know there are toxic impacts from fracking that need to be addressed, and NPR's report clearly kind of pointed in the direction we don't need to worry about it. And kind of they ended this little report. It was a 1.5 minute report with the reporter asking her, well, this means we can kind of relax about this issue, right? And the woman, her name was Desiree Plata, said, yeah, I think this is good news. We don't have to be so concerned about some things that we had to concern. And so we got evidence here to go after NPR and to go after local affiliates. And so, but we need to do it in a thoughtful way, with the idea that this is not going to happen immediately, but we can change NPR.
Yeah, well, great. Well, I'm going to move on, and we're going to talk to Don more about that story on NPR and lots of other research he's been doing about NPR's coverage. Thanks, Steve, for joining us for a minute, and we'll have more soon about all the local organizing you can do to talk to your local station. So stay tuned. So hang on 1 minute, and we're going to, next up will be Don Waitman, who's been sort of heading up our research division here on the NPR campaign. I want to take a minute before Don comes on to let you know that all the organizing work that Steve was talking about, talking to the local station manager in Asheville, we've heard from lots of other folks in upstate New York and western Massachusetts and the Boston area, all the way out to San Francisco and lots of places in between. Folks are already doing this, contacting local station managers, having conversations, challenging them to push, again, the national office here in DC to stop taking money from the Natural Gas Alliance. That's really effective, great work. So far, it's all been volunteer organized, which is wonderful, but we are asking for your support to keep that activism going. We'd love to be able to produce this kind of recipe kit or cookbook of some common facts and great research that you could take into a meeting with your general manager. We'd love to help condense the list of general managers and maybe get access to that general manager's board list that Steve was talking about. General managers who don't just run their local station, but also sit on an advisory board for the national office here in DC. Be able to get that information to you so that you can be more thoughtful, have better information at your fingertips, and do more to organize your local NPR station to be an advocate to end the fracking ads on NPR and improve the coverage overall of climate change and environmental issues. But we can only do that with citizen support. Environmental Action is 100% funded by members like you. And so when we have ideas about projects like this and we hear from activists like Steve, the way that we are able to support them is all through contributions you make. So right above this YouTube video again, there's a little link up here somewhere, just above my finger, to a page where you can chip in to support the NPR campaign here at Environmental Action. All the dollars will go through to local activists like Steve and like Don, who you'll meet in a minute, to support research and advocacy at the local level, building up to a national campaign, put pressure on the corporate office right behind me, and ask them to stop taking money from the Natural Gas Alliance, clean up their coverage on fracking and climate change, and do a better job of essentially joining the divestment movement, coming with us into the new millennium, where we're going to no longer be reliant on fossil fuels for energy, and we're also not going to be reliant on fossil fuel companies to fund our news coverage, really importantly. So hang on for 1 minute, and I'll go grab Don, and we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about research and some of the conversations we've had with the ombuds person here in DC. Hang on 1 minute. Come on over, Don.
Should I take off my sunglasses?
I'm leaving my sunglasses on. So you can leave yours on if you want.
I do. I do.
So, welcome back. So this is Don Waitman, another Beyond Extreme Energy activist with us, lives in Philadelphia, and has been calling you sort of the head of the research committee. We decided to give you a title for this, but Don has been volunteering his time to look at not just the number of stories on NPR that deal with fracking, but to start to do some analysis about sort of the qualitative value of those, how they talk about fracking on NPR as compared to how they talk about fracking in other news outlets. So let me stop there and say, first of all, tell us about the small bit of research you've done so far, and what you see as sort of a promising start to the findings in that.
Okay. Hello, people. My name is Don Waitman. He said I was head of the research committee. I think of myself more as the resident wonk. And my job right now is to dig into the NPR coverage of the natural gas industry, excuse me, the fracking gas industry, and to see whether they have in fact been biased by the money that they're getting from the industry. And it's real important here to see that it's not just that the reporting may have been one-sided, but that it's also probably bad journalism. Journalists are supposed to be neutral, objective, balanced, and fair. And if they're tilting toward the natural gas industry, then that's probably bad journalism. I'm going to come back to that, because if we find that, and we think we found a little, and we're going to go look for a whole lot more, NPR is going to be really upset and really defensive, and it's going to make for a very exciting series of confrontations. We've already seen a little bit of that with the ombudsperson at NPR that we've been exchanging email with. Yeah. Let me circle back. What I've done is look at a very, very, very small sample of the coverage that NPR has made of the natural gas industry since it was taken over. Started receiving funding from the natural gas industry back in 2009. And I found some things that, even looked at by themselves are bothersome. There's an interview with Daniel Yergin about a merger between two pipelines. And basically what Yergin said was, the sky's the limit for fracking. It's just going to be great from here on out, as far as you can see. And the NPR interviewer, Dan Siegel, I think it was, basically was sitting there going, yeah, that's right. There was no balance, no objectivity. It was just, basically, Yergin sounded like he was shilling for the industry. And he may well have been, because he consults with the industry and didn't disclose that. Right. And there was just no attempt by the interviewer to say, hey, wow, is there another side to this story? Bad journalism. And also, something that was a tilt in favor of the industry. And I found a couple of those, nothing that you would really call a smoking gun, but stuff even looked at in isolation smells a bit. And, the thing about a smell is you smell a little bit in one place, you smell a little bit more in another place, and after a while it begins to stink. And that's what I'm beginning to do now. What we've been trying to do with the ombudsperson is to basically exchange information in a sort of non-confrontational way. Just here's the material we need. Would you show it to us or make it available? We're trying to do this as a good, solid, let's have a level playing field kind of research. We're getting stiff. She does not want to cooperate. And she sort of says, well, show me whatever you've got, in a way that says, this had really better be very good, or I'm not going to bother with you ever again. And there's no attempt to sort of go, all right, what kinds of things are you finding? How can we talk about what you're finding in a way that, will help both of us?
Yeah. And I want to zero in a little bit on the ombuds conversation, because I think some of the environmental action members have heard a little bit about this, but not seen kind of the whole transcript of the back and forth. We've had several back and forth kind of email exchanges with the ombudswoman. Her name's Elizabeth Jensen. We think she works out of the New York office, but she's the national ombudsperson. She works for national NPR here in DC. And folks may remember back in 2013, Environmental Action actually had met with her predecessor, the old ombudsperson, Edward Schumacher, and sat down with him and the CEO of NPR and talked about our concerns with the fracking funding. And he kind of heard us out and promised to look into it, but he never really produced any research. So one of the good things about this new ombudsperson, Elizabeth Jensen, is that she did actually do a whole report on not fracking in particular, but sort of broader climate change and environmental funding. And a few weeks ago, we've emailed out to you links to her two-part series. You can find it on their website as well, where she looks at NPR's coverage of, again, very broadly defined climate change and the environment over the last 5 years. One of the things that really struck me about that series of articles was that even in her own research, which is very generalized, it's not as specific as some of the stuff Don's been doing, she does find a real clear decline in NPR's coverage. And particularly since they eliminated their climate change and environment desk and reassigned those reporters to other parts of NPR, which they said at the time wouldn't impact the overall coverage of the environment or fracking or anything else. But since they made that decision, the coverage has actually gone down by Jensen's own numbers by about 20% over the last 5 years. So they're actually producing less news about the environment, about climate change, and about fracking overall, just counting the headlines, the number of times they mention stuff, the coverage has gone down. So one of the things that Don helped us do in our correspondence with her was to push back on that and say, well, look, you've already found there's less coverage going on. And so one of the things we asked her for was transcripts of the coverage that she had identified. So we could try and go through that and say, is the coverage, maybe there's less coverage, but it's better. Maybe they're doing more reporting that's sort of more in depth, or they're longer stories, they have more content to them. Well, you can only really know that if we can look at the transcripts and see what she's seeing. So Don, pick it up from here and tell us, what we've heard back from the Ombudsman, and then what we'd like to do with your research over the next few months with LexisNexis.
Basically, her response has been, go do your own work. I'm not going to help you. And again, we've been trying to say, look, if we do cooperate, we'll get it done faster, we'll get it done better, it'll be more fair to both sides. And she just won't listen to that. So we're in a situation where we're going to have to do our own drilling. We're going to have to look at the stories that they apparently looked at. We don't even have a list of the stories that they examined. And we're going to try to sort of match that up and see whether there were problems that they identified and that they haven't talked about. In a couple of examples, she did sort of say, well, we really should have covered that, or whatever. Drew can give you examples better than I can. And then she sort of tried to explain it away. This is just an isolated incident.
Just in the last week, the most recent communication we had with her, Steve was talking about this story that aired actually early last week that was looking at the study of 74 wells in northeastern Pennsylvania. And what struck me about that coverage was that that story was produced just a few weeks after the Johns Hopkins study that Steve mentioned came out, which was much more comprehensive. The Johns Hopkins study that found a direct correlation between living near a fracking well and the incidence of premature birth and at-risk pregnancies. That was a study conducted over multiple years. They worked with over 10,000 mothers and children in Pennsylvania. So way more data, just a much bigger study about the impacts of fracking. And again, clearly showed that there was a danger or a public health impact of fracking. But of the two reports that came out within, just a week or two of each other, they chose to focus on the one that only surveyed 74 wells, that only found limited contamination, mostly from chemicals being spilled on the ground. And the headline they chose to run with that short piece was, fracking safer than we thought. Hooray. So instead of taking the opportunity to do, a side-by-side comparison and say one study shows a real impact and one study didn't, they just totally whiffed on that opportunity. So that's the kind of thing that we could identify better with the research Don's trying to do. When we asked Elizabeth Jensen, the ombudsperson, about it, she wrote back and said, yes, you're right. We didn't cover the Johns Hopkins study, and we did cover this other study, but we think we did a perfectly job covering the study we studied, and we can't get them all, so no problem here. So that's why we've been pretty disappointed with the response from the Ombudsman so far, and why we think we need to do our own research on this.
Right. And Drew used the phrase side by side, and that's part of what I'm going to be doing, I hope with some help, which is that we're also looking at the coverage of the American media network, the other public radio news network, and looking at their coverage side by side with what NPR was doing. We're looking at the state impact stations or networks in Pennsylvania and Texas to see what they were doing. And believe me, what they were doing was a whole lot better than what NPR was doing. And we're also looking at mainstream, if you can call CNN mainstream, to see what they were doing. So that there really is a series of comparisons to say, hey, look, it's not just that if you looked at a particular NPR story in isolation, it doesn't look so good. Well, if you compare it to what the American marketplace people were doing, or the state people were doing, or CNN was doing, and you say, hey, wow, these three covered this story in this way, and NPR covered this story in another way. Looks kind of funny because the other way that NPR was doing favored the natural gas industry.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing that is really important here is that the Think About It ads are a very, very important part of the story. Just take an example. The Jürgen Siegel interview that I talked about before, that you came away from that thinking, boy, I wish I had money to invest in the natural gas industry. Just really make them look good. If they were running, Think About It spots next to or on either side of that, you're going to come away from that sequence, the program plus the ads on either side, the bits on the other side, with a, hey, wow, these people are really great. The Think About It ads are basically going to be reinforcing whatever tilting that NPR was doing in favor of the natural gas industry. So you get hit twice as hard, or several times as hard. Well, again, we asked the ombudsperson, can we have transcripts of those? And she basically said, no, I don't know anything about it. Go talk to our underwriting department. So, that's one more person we'll have to ask. I expect they'll say no, and we'll just keep pushing. Part of what we're doing here is developing what you might call an inside game to go with the outside game that Steve and Drew have been talking about. You people, if you contact your local stations, if you make your dissatisfaction known, if you let them know that you will be heard, that you don't like what they're doing, and do that, so to speak, in the outside, while Drew and me and Steve and Melinda Tuhus are pushing from the inside and pushing to the, what are you hiding, NPR? Why won't you give us this information? We need it to do a fair and balanced study. You should be in the business of fair and balanced studies. You shouldn't be hiding evidence. You shouldn't be hiding data. What gives? And we intend to keep pushing all the way up to the NPR board of directors if we have to. And if we start identifying as much bad journalism, slanted bad journalism that favors the industry, slanted bad journalism that favors the industry in the context of pro-industry spots, think about it, then we'll just go elsewhere and we'll start raising our concerns elsewhere. We'll go to the foundations that are funding NPR and saying, do you guys really want to be funding these people? We'll go to the journalism reviews and the other people that evaluate journalism for fairness and all of this. We're not going to stop on the inside game. And the point of that is that we're hoping, and if you will help us a little bit to subsidize, to pay for the research that we have to do, because it's not free, then we can do the inside game and the outside game at the same time. Let me say just a little bit about where we need a few dollars from you. Because NPR wouldn't cooperate and make the transcripts available to us, we have to go get them ourselves. Get them ourselves means that we pay for access to an online database called Nexus. Nexus has transcripts of just news stories, whatever you can imagine, from all over the world, and they have more or less complete sets of transcripts from NPR and from the other public radio stations and other bases for comparison. The only problem with this is that Nexus is expensive. And even with the quick and dirty research or download that I will be doing, it costs hundreds of dollars. And neither Environmental Action or especially Beyond Extreme Energy have a lot of money floating around to sort of throw at this kind of research. So if you can spare $10, $50, that will take us a fair piece toward being able to do the research that will allow us to do the inside game and allow us to push NPR in the boardroom suites and the plush offices, as well as on the streets and in the local station.
Great. And that's a great segue. So one more reminder, just above this video up here is a link where you can chip in to support Don's research. Thank you, sir.
Yes, and thank you. If you can help us, we'll do it better and faster.
There you go. It's as good a fundraising pitch as we can make. So this is really important, and I like Don's metaphor of the inside-outside kind of strategy. Steve, who was on a little earlier, was telling us about work that we can all do talking to local general managers in our home stations. Wherever you live, there's usually a local NPR affiliate, and you have the power as a listener, especially if you're a contributor to your local NPR station, to call up the general manager of your local affiliate, talk to them about the coverage of fracking and natural gas, talk to them about the Natural Gas Alliance sponsorship. It's much harder to get a meeting with folks here in Washington, D.C. As we can tell you, we're sitting out here in their courtyard because they didn't want to meet with us in person, even though we're all here in D.C. for the day. So it is much harder to get a meeting with the with the NPR staff here in D.C., but we can do it, and our best path is probably through the research that Don is doing, being able to go through and show in a really systemic, quantifiable way, here's how NPR was covering the issue of fracking and climate change, and here's why it wasn't as good. Here's why there weren't as many stories, and the stories they were doing weren't as in-depth, where they missed things like the study from Johns Hopkins while reporting on a study which showed comparatively much more favorable coverage of the natural gas industry. So those kind of examples are what we need to get, what we need to have to be able to convince people like the NPR Ombudsman, the board of directors here, and also the NPR CEOs and staff and journalism department people to take us seriously and take this question seriously. Because ultimately, we're not opposed to NPR. We're trying to make their coverage better. Most of us are NPR listeners. A lot of us are NPR donors to our local stations. We really are the people who care about and support journalism at NPR. And it's up to us to make sure not only that we're funding the reporting that goes on, but also that we're holding them accountable and making sure that they're covering the right stories, they're doing it in the right way, and that they're doing it in a timely fashion, as we would expect from public radio in America. It should be great.
Drew, could I interrupt? Because there's a breaking news right now.
Oh, okay.
And I just saw it on the NPR news feed here. There is a hurricane, 160-mile-per-hour hurricane called Hurricane Patricia in the Pacific, about to hit southwestern Mexico. NPR's feed here said it may be the largest hurricane in recorded history coming out of the Pacific.
Wow.
So this is why we think why NPR needs to be confronted about its anger ads, because it is fracking, among other things, other fossil fuel infrastructures which are impacting the climate. And this being a catastrophic hurricane, maybe larger than any hurricane that's ever come out of the Pacific, is one example of why this is such a critical issue right at this time. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's great. So,
I saw it right on the feed here, and then I looked it up, and USA Today had a longer report.
Yep, so. Breaking news right here from NPR, though not on NPR, that there's a huge hurricane coming out of the Pacific, and an example of a kind of climate-fueled storm, which we think is really important for NPR to report on, and to report on right, put those storms in the context of the American fracking industry and our reliance on fossil fuels. And there's things we can do about it. Those are really important news stories to tell. We're not hearing enough of them on NPR right now. And we need your help to make sure that we can convince them of that and to change the coverage as well as to change the sponsorship here at NPR. So one last time, and then we'll let you go for the day. Just above this YouTube video, there is a link where you can chip in to support the work. Whether you're excited about the research Don's doing, which will show a real side-by-side comparison and try and catch NPR at not covering issues like fracking and climate change as well as they should, or as well as even their other local affiliates do. That research needs funding, needs support so we can go get the database access that we need, get transcripts of all of the NPR articles from the last few years, and be able to do this really systemic comparison of them. We also need your support to help local members contact local stations and general managers. So the stuff Steve was talking about contacting your local stations and working with GMs to change the coverage locally and put pressure through the local stations, which supply most of the funding to NPR, to change their coverage and change their sponsorship. And eventually, where we think this is all heading is that we really do want to sit down with the highest people, the heads of the news department, the CEO at NPR, the ombudsperson. We want to meet with them. We want to present all this stuff, the local station support, the research that Don's doing, your signatures and the values of all of your contributions to local NPR stations, and make the case that NPR has an opportunity to change their coverage, change their sponsorship, be a leader on climate change and fracking, instead of being, as many of us call them, the drive-away moment station, where we love so much of the content on NPR, but then you hear one of these biased stories or you hear one of the Think About It ads, and it makes you just want to drive away from NPR and forget about them for a while. So if you're convinced that it's time to change NPR from the coverage, change NPR's sponsorship, make them more accountable to us, and cover the story of fracking in so many local communities that we're fighting on, then please chip in if you can. Any amount is great, and we'd love to have your support in this. That's what we're here to ask you for. So thanks again from NPR headquarters here in Washington, D.C. I'm Drew Hudson. We were joined earlier by Steve Norris from North Carolina and Don Waitman from Pennsylvania, talking about our NPR campaign. There's a link right above where you can chip in to support the work if you think it sounds good or you're passionate about some part of this. And whether you can donate or not, please share this video, these interviews around with your friends on social networks. There's some share buttons over to the side here. You can share on Facebook or on Twitter with your friends. And we'll also send out a link after the broadcast here where you can forward the link to the petition to your friends and ask them to sign on to the petition to NPR as well. We're just shy of 40,000 signatures so far, so it'd be great to bust through that today or over the weekend. Be able to tell NPR that 3,000 or 5,000 new people have signed the petition just since this broadcast today, and that we're really building support. 40,000 people around the country calling on them, change the sponsorship, change the coverage, do what's right on fracking. Again, thanks everybody for tuning in and watching with us. This has been Frack-Free American Life from NPR's front doorstep. I'm Drew Hudson from Environmental Action. Thanks so much for your support. We'll be in touch soon.